Alright guys, so I'm back with another video. I'm going to go over 1.28 with you guys. I want to explain a few things, why I had to make certain decisions, so on and so forth. And the latest update, there were a lot of changes that fixed some long-standing issues. But we'll go over those. There's still one problem here. I'm not 100% sure why I need different settings. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I've never had to do that before. I'm going to be looking into that problem and find out the cause of it. But this is basically the pole vector that controls the orientation of the elbow. It keeps it from bending this way, from bending like that. And it seems for some reason I need the X to be positive for the pistol whenever he's holding the pistol, and I'm not sure why. Like I said, I've never had to do that before. So anyway, in the copy motion, in case you guys don't remember, the pose history has to come before the copy motion, because the pose history, when you're using it when you're using the copy motion with motion matching and you want it to draw from the pose history so that the delay works. By the way, the delay seems to be an on-off switch still. I haven't completely nailed down why increasing the delay doesn't actually make it delay even more. I'm not really familiar with why, but I do know that inside the code, because I have gone through the actual source code just briefly, and from what I've seen, it was actually getting the collected bones array off of there, and it was searching for the source bone. So in this case, we don't need the bone to modify to be in that list, but the copy space and the source bone more than likely will need to be in that. I'm not going to go back over how copy motion works, guys, but I'm going to explain to you why I did things this way and why it works the way it does. Now, I made some wild claims as far as the offset root bone. I thought I was seeing a serious flaw with it, but it turns out that it actually wasn't the offset root bone. It was the order of operation of things. I'll go over that here in a little bit, but the reason for the confusion is because I started trying to transfer a fix that I had to apply on this over to the DAO layering system in here. So when I went to do that, I realized it wasn't working quite the same. And it never dawned on me that inside of here, the layering happens before the offset root bone and the pose history, because this doesn't use copy motion. And so copy motion has to happen after the pose history, not necessarily after the offset root bone. But if you place the offset root bone after the pose history, like down here, for example, it can cause problems whenever you're turning. So there are still some problems whenever you're turning, but that has to do with the offset root bone and how it interpolates things. I'm sure they'll fix that eventually, or come up with some kind of solution for it. But the point is that we can't place the offset root bone down here on the end. It needs to come up here, and it needs to happen before the pose history. So the problem is whenever you place all your layering data after the the offset root bone, then something odd happens. And I will demonstrate that to you inside of this pistol layer here. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to draw out my pistol. Right. So you'll see something odd here. And just focus on the lower body. So in the lower body, the legs are going from this direction to this direction. it's going across like this. But on that overlay state, those poses are aligned 90 degrees. So they are rotating with the capsule as the capsule rotates to face the direction that I'm looking, as you can see here. So that creates a problem because whenever we go to layer this and we want it to be in mesh space, a mesh space rotation blend, for example, then it's going to apply these rotations relative to how they are right here. And what that means is it means if we look behind us real fast and the character's torso is still facing this direction, then the character will be aiming over here. I hope you understand how serious of a problem that is. So in order to fix that, so that a mesh space rotation blend can still be applied as it was before in a traditional setup, what we actually need to do is we need to actually get that pose and we need to align it to the root bone of the motion matching pose. And that's what we do right here. So even though I'm looking over here, now his legs and his feet are aligned with this lower body animation. And in this case, we can accurately get the mesh space rotation of this as we would expect it to be. And that brings me to this, the get actor transform. Why am I using the get actor transform? So if you're watching the capsule, you'll see the character is not rotating right here until he turns in place. Whenever the animation plays, he turns. But you'll see that the capsule is rotating with me, and it's always facing the camera. So the offset root bone, it counter rotates the root bone of the character. It counter rotates it to keep it from turning in place. After it exceeds a certain threshold, it'll play a turn in place animation. And whenever it plays the turn in place animation, the offset root bone right here, it'll release the translation and the rotation, and it will rotate the root bone based off of the rotation and translation of that root bone in the animation that's playing. In the case of a turn in place animation, that means that he's only rotating. He's not moving in space. He's only rotating in place. So that's how that works. So I explained that so that you could understand what I'm doing here. So when I get the inverse transform rotation, what it's doing is it's actually getting that root transform of the motion matching pose, which gets updated after this executes. And since this executes before this, then we know that this is the latest update in that it's pre-output pose. And so this is the very latest one. This will be the root transform we get after we've done all of this and we've output our pose. So the pose hasn't been output yet. So we get that root transform rotation and we make that relative to the actor's transform. And then we rotate the root bone of this overlay pose by that rotation, which aligns it with the locomotion. And that's what we want. And so this actually is not needed for the ALS in pose, and I'll explain to you why. So when we're doing a layered blend per bone, this is the only thing that's actually affected by this problem right here. And that's when we apply this as a mesh space rotation blend. So right here, when we're making this dynamic additive between the M pose and the N pose, it's actually not important. Even though we're getting the difference between these two, and then we're applying it to this overlay state. And the reason why is because it kind of does this right here for us whenever we do that. Not all because this hasn't had this applied to it. Also, we're not actually applying this as a mesh space rotation blend right here on this layered blend per bone. Now on this pistol pose, this is the only thing that's different than the copy motion rifle linked anim layer. As you'll see in here, we don't have that one. And this is basically just applying the motion matching arm swing animation to the upper arm L and down to the hand, not including the clavicle. So we're excluding the shoulder from this. We're only applying this to the arm itself. And whenever he's not aiming, we apply this 100%. But when we are aiming, we only apply it 50%. And the reason why is because, well, I'll just go ahead and show you. If we apply this 0%, then we have this weird stiffness here. If we just keep this at 100%, it just looks weird. You see it whenever we first start it, you see how it looks? It just looks weird. Now, I might end up coming back in here. This just looks so weird. I don't know how to fix that yet, but I'm going to have to do something whenever he's accelerating or whenever a start animation is playing in the motion matching database. Then I might have to add logic that says, hey, if we're playing an animation from the start database, then, you know, the start jogging database, then maybe, you know, do this differently. So I'll look into that. I might have to add some extra logic to handle that. And that's why I didn't do it 0%, but I didn't do it 100% either. I did it 0.5%. So it's kind of a temporary workaround until I can find a better solution. So that's the breakdown on that. We don't really need this up here. It's just hanging out. Over here, the problem is, guys, is I had to do this because, well, the blend depth, the reason why I have such a high blend depth is because that's as high as I could go without losing accuracy. The thing is whenever you have an aiming pose, that aiming pose needs to be aiming straight down the y-axis. It needs to be pointing straight down that axis. If he has a gun in his hand, his gun needs to be perfectly aligned with that y-axis. And if it isn't, then your aim offset is going to have offsets. And that's the reason why. And so inside of here, your aim is not going to be accurate. It's going to be very inaccurate if you don't layer the overlay pose onto the locomotion as a mesh space rotation blend. If you don't do this, then you get this. So you see how that arm is pointing down and it's swinging left to right. It's swinging left to right because it's following the shoulder. You see, and the shoulder is following the spine. And so if it's a trade-off. if we want him to be aiming properly in the correct direction, then we have to sacrifice something. We can't have him aiming properly in the right direction using this specific setup and have that dynamic movement on the body as well. And the thing is if the shoulder is moving back and forth that much, we can't actually not have the arm swinging. Because if the arm isn't swinging, then the shoulder is going to continuously be dislocated from the shoulder socket. It's going to look weird. It's going to look nasty. That's the problem I was having in my previous setup with the DAO layering system. That was one of the main complaints people had about it. And that's the reason why I changed my entire approach to all of this. So it's a trade-off for now. I'll look into, I've tried doing dynamic layering, and it just doesn't, it causes more problems than it fixes. But I'll keep looking. I just haven't had time to look over it I haven't had much time to work on this at all over the past 3 weeks, guys, to be honest with you. I've had a lot going on. So I'll look into that this weekend. I'll look over it whenever I have time. I have work that I have to do for somebody, so I don't really get a day off this weekend, even though I probably need it. But yeah, so now you understand. That's the reason why we're using this. I set that blend depth as high as I could get it in order to maintain as much dynamic movement in the body whenever we're moving as possible without it affecting the accuracy of the arms. So that's the reason why that blend depth is so high. And that was the only other change I made in this setup. And so that brings us to the DAO additive layering. All right, so that's basically what I did on this one. I had to move everything over beyond the offset root bone in the pose history. And the reason why this works, guys, the reason why we can do this safely after the offset root bone is because we're only applying this stuff on the upper body. If you try to apply this stuff on the lower body, you're going to have problems. You can apply it on the pelvis as long as you're not affecting the leg positions or the root. You can't affect the root or the legs, but you can affect everything else, and it won't affect the offset root bone. It won't cause foot sliding. So I do have this whole thing for the legs here. I highly do not recommend using that. In fact, you could probably just take this out if you wanted, and it wouldn't hurt anything. You could probably take this out right here as well, and it probably wouldn't hurt anything. So inside of here, I did make some changes. You'll see that I'm not starting these at the clavicles anymore. So I wanted more dynamic movement in the shoulders, but I didn't want that dynamic movement in the shoulders to actually affect how the arms themselves were posed. Whenever I applied it in mesh space as a mesh space rotation blend, I wanted them to be pointing straight ahead, but I didn't want it to affect the way that the shoulders were moving from the underlying layer. The other change that I made is right here on the pelvis layer. So on the pelvis layer now, this only affects the pelvis now. No other bone is included in this. Only the pelvis gets offset. And that allows us to drop the pelvis and maybe reorient it a little bit based off of the overlay pose. That way we can safely drop or blend between the pelvis position and rotation of the overlay pose and the current motion matching pose. So that was the changes I made in the layering system. Right here, you'll see that I actually did end up needing to apply this to both of these right here. And this one, I think I needed to. I'm not sure if I tested it without doing it on the ALS in pose. I think I do need it because the thing to understand is because we have these layered blend per bones chained together, the previous one actually directly affects the outcome of this one right here. That wasn't the case in our copy motion setup, because in our copy motion setup, this right here is actually the base pose, and then this actually is being layered on top of that. And so it's not, we're not actually, now if it was something like that, then it would be a problem, but we're doing it like this. However, over here in our DAO one, that's not exactly always the case. So if you look here, this is a mesh space rotation blend, but we can apply a mesh space additive, a local space additive, an overlay pose, or the base pose onto this upper arm L, which is in mesh space rotation blend. That's the reason why I think we need this. I don't remember if I tested it out. It could be irrelevant. I don't know. If it is, I'll remove it later, but I think that it is relevant in this case. Again, in this one, we're doing this right here. We're doing it right here on the upper body, but we're not doing it with the mesh space rotation blend. So that could make a difference. Then right here, we're doing all that stuff just like before. I did do this a little bit differently. Actually, I skipped over something. I'm sorry, guys. I will go back and I'll cover it now. So if you go to the yaw AO, you'll see we have this F right here, which stands for function. If you go over into your My Blueprint, you'll see that I actually made this right here, and I haven't actually even categorized it yet. But this is a pure thread safe function, which actually interpolates the value before feeding it out. And the reason why we had to do it like that is because we need this to be done on demand. Why does it need to be done on demand? I will explain. So it's an order of operation thing. Right here, we're getting the root transform rotation. But this root transform rotation needs to be the post offset root bone root transform rotation. If we were to cache that value from the Blueprint thread safe update, this gets updated just prior to graph update. So the value that we would get would be the pre-offset root bone rotation, not the post-offset root bone rotation. And that's the reason why inside of here I had to make this a pure function so that I could interpolate the value. So I hope that explains it to you. That's the reason why I did that the way I did. So moving back over here, I believe I did the same thing in here. No, I didn't have to do it in here. Okay. So that wasn't necessary in here, so I didn't do that in here. But yeah, at least I don't think it was. I'll go back and check if it is. If there are problems with that, then I will do it. But I don't believe I was having the same problem. The problem I was having, if I didn't do that, whenever he rotates around like that, instead of rotating to the left and then back to the right, let's see. Yeah, instead of rotating the correct direction, he would rotate behind, he would twist around behind him. I'll try to show you here. So instead of rotating this direction here, he would rotate, he would be looking this way, but he would rotate this direction. He would go behind him and twist pretzel. He would pretzel and come back around. And that's the reason why in this one I had to use this method here. It was an interpolation problem. Am I done? Yeah, I think so, guys. Jesus Christ. As you can see right here, I didn't have to do the same thing with this one. It seems to be a problem which is more than likely caused by the leg IK or something, or the copy motion itself. Maybe it's distorting something and causing me to have to flip those values right here on the X. Like I said, I'll look into it and try to figure out exactly what's causing that problem. But I didn't have to do that in the larynx system. Now, over here, this is the new method, the new approach that I have. So I want, if he's kind of like, if his pelvis is sitting lower so that his legs are kind of bent a little bit, then I do want that to be transferred over to the pelvis. That's why I have it mesh space 100%. However, on the spine, I am now applying this partially in overlay. Now remember, this stuff propagates downwards, so the legs and the pelvis do not affect the spine at all. The spine is excluded from the pelvis and the legs layer, which means that whenever you apply the spine now in overlay 50%, that means the other 50% is motion matching. So that gives us a blend between the overlay and the motion matching. So that's how I fixed the problem where the arms were desynchronizing with the spine. So that's also the reason why now in the DAO, it looks a little stiffer than it did before. It was a trade-off that I had to make in order to fix that problem. But I think the end result right there, I think that looks so much better than what it did before. Not only that, but now we've also fixed the problem with the aim offset. And yeah, I think that pretty much covers it, guys. So, I mean, we did have to make the pose just a little bit stiffer, but like I said, there wasn't really any way around it if we wanted to fix those desynchronization problems. And I'll see you in the next video.